I have an app on my watch that tells me how much sleep I got in the preceding night. Every morning I wake up and check how many hours was I actually asleep, and then it divides it into being in REM sleep or core sleep or deep sleep. And sometimes the app even says, "Well done, you hit your sleep target." Unfortunately, this doesn't happen as often as I would like, and especially not during the school year when 6 a.m. wake-ups and late nights are part of the program. But the funny thing is that regardless of whether I hit my sleep target or not, doesn't necessarily affect how rested or refreshed I feel in the morning. This morning, I did hit my sleep goal, but I did not want to wake up. And the alarm kept on ringing, and it was a slow start to the day, as my children's counselors will tell you, as we drove in as one of the final cars into the parking lot. Sleep and being tired become important things for adults. Someone suggested being an adult is pretty easy. You just feel tired all the time. You tell people how tired you are, and they tell you how tired they are, and that's basically it. But there's a difference between being tired, having slept, and being well rested or being refreshed and rejuvenated. I've been reflecting a lot on my experience of being at summer camp for 2 weeks, which is, by definition, exhausting. The days start early, they end late, they are filled with activities, more steps and exercise than I normally get in a week, can be accomplished in a single day, and I'm tired. But when I get back, I feel rejuvenated. I'm exhausted through those days, but I somehow feel refreshed when I return home. I think there are various elements of the experience that allows, despite the exhaustion and tiredness, to feel refreshed and rejuvenated. The chance to disconnect from the endless news cycle and to put the phone down. An opportunity to not have the regular concerns of laundry, cooking, and cleaning, and the things that fill our days. And just the simple importance of a break from the routine when things are different. All of these elements mean that despite the fact that camp is exhausting, I find it refreshing and rejuvenating. In some ways, camp is a Shabbat in time, a Sabbath of time for something different. A different routine, a different way of living, a different way of being. This week in our Torah portion, we have the second telling of the Ten Commandments. We received them in Exodus in Shemot, when we got them the first time, and now in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, Moses is retelling the story and reminding us of when we received the Ten Commandments by telling them to us again. But, as we know, memory can be a funny thing, and so Moses' second telling of the Ten Commandments is slightly different than the first telling. It is most evident in that commandment about Shabbat. When God gave us the Ten Commandments, originally, we were told, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And then at the conclusion of those instructions, we are told, for 6 days Adonai made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them, and God rested on the seventh day. Therefore Adonai blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. That's the original commandment that we received at Mount Sinai for Shabbat. But in Devarim, it begins not remember the Sabbath day, but keep the Sabbath day and keep it holy. We recognize this distinction between Shamor and Zachor, the Hebrew words, when we sing Lechad Odi, claiming Shamor v'Zachor b'dibur echad. Remember and keep in a single word, in a single utterance. But there's a difference between remembering something and keeping something. And then, as Moses continues with his telling of the Shabbat commandments, he expands them to include the slave in resting. And continues by saying, remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Adonai your God freed you from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore Adonai your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Remembering versus keeping, and the emulation of God who rested at the end of creation versus resting in contrast to being a slave. These are very different ways of telling the Shabbat commandment. And when reflecting on them, in the past, I have liked the idea of remembering Shabbat rather than keeping Shabbat. Because to remember something is easier than to keep something. And when we think about keeping Shabbat being in the Hebrew Shomrei Shabbat, guardians of Shabbat, if you will, I think we've allowed the orthodox interpretation of what it means to keep Shabbat to dominate. And so if we're not doing that, we feel, well, we're not really keeping Shabbat in that traditional way. But I want to reject that idea this year. As I've been thinking about this instruction and what it means to rest and to really be refreshed, I think we can keep Shabbat, not in the way that orthodoxy suggests, but in a way that is relevant to us. Not necessarily following all of the restrictions that the rabbis came up with, because those are actually linked to the building of the tabernacle in the wilderness, and I'm going to bet $100 that no one here is building a tabernacle tomorrow. So you're all fine at not breaking that law as a starting point. But we can think about how we keep Shabbat in a way that is meaningful for us. How can we find that way to rest and be refreshed for today? Kindling a flame is not the task it once was. So what does rest look like today? What does it look like to take a day as a break from the routine so that we can emerge back into the week feeling different? For me, I think it means that I need to start putting the phone down in a different way on Shabbat. That I need to think about what it is at camp that is so powerful and try to bring that into my everyday life. Not every day, that's unrealistic, but one day a week. That's all Shabbat asks of us. One day to live a little bit differently, to have that time to be refreshed. Maybe it's the way that camp allows us to be in this metaphorical bubble with our family, our friends in this special community, and to try to find ways to do that on Shabbat. Everyone here in person or those watching at home, one check. You've done that by coming to the service tonight and being part of this community. Whatever it might be, however we might find a way to observe Shabbat, to celebrate Shabbat, to keep Shabbat, I think we need to be proud in claiming it for ourselves in a way that is relevant to ourselves. Adulting can be exhausting. And to keep doing that 7 days a week without stop and without rest is too much. Shabbat was a revolutionary idea when it was introduced, and it's one that continues to be revolutionary because we do live in a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week society. But for one day a week, I don't want us to just remember that it's Shabbat, because I don't think that's necessarily sufficient to feel rested and refreshed. And I don't want us to keep Shabbat in a way that is relevant to other people. But I want to challenge every one of us to find that way, to be Shomrei Shabbat, to be a guardian of Shabbat, a keeper of Shabbat, that allows each of you individually to emerge into Sunday refreshed and rejuvenated. Shabbat Shalom.